You may have noticed a little difference in our altar this morning when you came in. We had a wonderful time last night celebrating Shivaratri. And some of us, this part of us not included, went all night long until 6 this morning. Quite a number of people went till between 1 and 2. And then we had some brave souls that marshaled all night long, chanting the divine name of Shiva and meditating. So soak it all in, because it won't be here next week. You know, Yogananda did not come to bring Hinduism to the United States. He came to bring really a new dispensation from the divine ones. But there are certain traditions, and you might even say trappings, of Hinduism, since he came out of that tradition that I guess you could say we're too attached to let go. And so through the year, you'll find several of these that you're welcome to come and participate in, usually on Saturday nights. We'll be celebrating Durga Ma and Ganesha, and of course Krishna, as we go through the year and celebrate certain parts of their lives. So this is quite a question we're being asked. Can man see God? And as Sita read, Swami kind of turns it around to make it a little more palatable and answerable. Can God be seen? But Yogananda's account of what he saw is just so dramatic and so thrilling. And if you haven't read it recently, or if you've never read chapter 14 in the autobiography, it contains what she read this morning of his experience and much more. And to go back and reread it and enjoy it again. But it's not only dramatic and thrilling in an outward way, it calls to us. It beckons to us that maybe it's not enough to hear about it or to read about it, but that we should be about the business, if we want to experience that, to move in that direction. You know, the Bible says, God said to Moses in the Old Testament, he said, "You cannot see my face, for no one can see me and live." And the high priest of the Jewish people back in Old Testament times, at least a portion of them, would once a year go into the Holy of Holies, where they were to experience God directly. I think it's on Yom Kippur, but one day out of the year, they would go into the Holy of Holies, where the Ark of the Covenant was, in the tabernacle. And that was the most holy spot for the Jewish people. And not that it always stayed the same geographically, because they had to move that when they were in the wilderness and so on. But the apparel of the Jewish priest, the high priest, just the highest priest would do this, was interesting. On the bottom hem of the fringe, just above the hem of his robe, were a lot of tiny little bells. So when he went in there to greet and connect and perhaps dialogue, maybe it was a monologue, with God, they would be able to tell whether he was pure enough to see God and live. And if the bells stopped tinkling, they assumed he had not passed the test. And there's a tradition, although it's not in the scriptures, but there's a tradition that they tied a rope around his right ankle. And so he would go in and tinkle, 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 tinkle. But then if it didn't tinkle for too long a time, he pulled on the rope and would drag his body out. So there's some seriousness to this idea of seeing God and looking him in the face. No man hath seen God at any time. The only begotten Son, which is in the bosom of the Father, he hath declared him, we heard from John. So you initially think, well, okay, so much for my chances. So, it kind of rules most of us out. But Divine Mother has left us kind of like a little trail of breadcrumbs to continue on the path towards her. Sort of little appetizers to give us a slight taste of what it might be like, what is to come eventually for us if we continue to make effort, if we make the commitment to find God, and eventually we can get a good look at her. And I found myself, as I was thinking about this, thinking how interesting it was when I was thinking of God telling Moses, no one can see my face, they'll die. And then when I thought of following the breadcrumbs that Divine Mother had left until I got all the way to Divine Mother and saw her in all her glory, it was much less scary to go for Divine Mother than it was for this Jewish, patriarchal, fierce, demanding God. And so I again gave a little prayer of thanks for having found this path and having its interpretation to live by and to pull me in the right direction, and think that I have a chance, and I certainly don't have to do it out of fear, but out of love. When we hear a passage like this description of Yogananda's, it can really reawaken us to what the possibilities are and stimulate our own yearning. And this is just a natural part of the plan to kindle and flame the fire of our desire to know God. Yogananda's first disciple, Dr. Lewis, who was a Boston dentist of all things, Dr. Lewis went to hear a lecture of Yogananda's in Boston in the early 20s. I'm not sure what year it was, but the very early 20s. And he went to hear him at the Rosicrucian Society. And after he heard him, he was very impressed, of course. And after he heard him, he decided, I have to talk to this person directly. So he made a private interview to go and see Yogananda, who was giving interviews at the Unity House in Boston. So his main motivation, the motivation for going to see Yogananda the first time, is that he was on a quest to understand certain passages of the Bible that he had never heard a really good explanation for. He was a student of the Bible. He was a truth seeker above all else. And something about Master, the advertisement for Master's talk, had connected with him. So he went to the talk, and then later he went to the interview. And when he went to the interview, he told Yogananda a little, I don't know if abruptly is the right word, not quite abrasively, but I am here to find out whether you know what these Bible passages mean that I've been studying and trying to understand for so much of my life. And I want to know what the light is that Jesus is talking about when he says, if your eye is single, your whole body will be filled with light. Can you help me understand that? And Yogananda said, I think so. So then he asked this question, which I find so interesting. Of course, we know they must have had past lives together, and that helps explain it. But right out of the blue, he said to Dr. Lewis, will you always love me? he just met this man, right? He just came in and he said, can you help me understand these things? And he's like this. And Yogananda just says, will you always love me? And something made Dr. Lewis say, yes. And so then Master said, fine, I will take charge of your life. And actually rubbed his hands together, Dr. Lewis said. Rubbed his hands together, I will take charge of your life. So then he had him come and sit in front of him, and he had I don't know if it was an extra or his own tiger skin that he put down on the floor in front of him. And for those of you who might be concerned, a yogi only uses tiger skins from tigers that have died a natural death, which may be why so few of them have tiger skins there. But he put down this tiger skin on the floor in front of where he was sitting and asked Dr. Lewis to sit down on the tiger skin. So Dr. Lewis sat down there and crossed his legs, and later he said, never in my life had I sat on the floor in a cross-legged position, but somehow I got into it. However, it was not the lotus pose, he said. So he's sitting there in front of Master, and Master leans over and touches him at the spiritual eye, at the third eye. And just immediately, he could see the spiritual eye, and then his whole being was just flooded by divine light. And after he had experienced that for a while, kind of came back to the present, and Master leaned over and put his forehead against Dr. Lewis's forehead. And immediately his top chakra opened, and he could see thousands and thousands and thousands of rays, sometimes described as the lotus petals, but the rays coming out of the top of his head and extending all over the universe. Well, the only begotten Son, which is in the bosom of the Father, he hath declared him. So that declared him is really what happened in the story I just told. It's one's Christ-like guru transferring or transmitting his awareness of God to his devotee. I don't even know if Dr. Lewis knew the word devotee yet at that point, but Master gave him that experience. And so for those that are attuned to the teachers, if they're a master, a teacher's consciousness, that is possible for us. So can man see God? I don't know if you remember, but a few weeks ago we were talking about a woman who was in the crowd when Jesus was talking, and she cried out and said, "Oh, your mother is so blessed that she could have you, that she could bear you." And Jesus responded by saying, "Yea, rather blessed are they that hear the word of God and keep it." And what he was saying there was that even better than bearing divine children was to be able to hear the Om. We can hear something else right now. It's actually a part of the Om, but it's such a discrete part that we have a very different experience with it than we do the full Om. And so we can certainly answer the question, can man hear God? And maybe that's getting us on the way to man seeing God, right? Because that for whatever reason, that comes sooner. That is in our practices and all, that comes more quickly. The Om technique that we practice on this path can help us to hear God. And because those sounds that we hear are astral sounds, that helps us, that is us moving closer to God. Whether we're just hearing individual sounds from the chakras or 2 or 3 sounds at the same time, or eventually when we can hear Om, That should give us confidence, right? Well, we can hear God. Why shouldn't we be able to see God? And I must say that it's, as many of you no doubt know, it's a thrilling experience just to hear God in those tiny little bits, even if we're faintly hearing one of the sounds. It can be a thrilling thing, and compare it to seeing God as Master explain to us his experience. It's difficult to comprehend what that would be like. So when we say to see God, we definitely are talking about more than just seeing a little bit of light in meditation, although that's such a wonderful beginning. In the New Testament, John uses the expression, or asking, do they comprehend it? Do they comprehend the light? And there again, he's talking about much more than just seeing some in meditation. But that comprehend means like, did they plunge into it? Did they merge into it? Were they absorbed in that light? And of course, Krishna says the very same thing as he did in our reading. You can't see me with mortal eyes, so I will give you sight divine. And the scripture goes on to say that the Lord revealed himself then to Arjuna in that infinite form. And then Arjuna saw the 1,000-armed being, irradiating the whole universe, infinite and eternal. And one just wonders the 1,000 rays there, and Dr. Lewis's 1,000 rays or 1,000 petals that came out of his top chakra, if that's not very, very similar. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. Thus, Jesus indicated that God could be seen, but only by those who have pure hearts. Only by those whose hearts are not attached to the things that we observe with the senses, all the things of the world. And perfect purity of heart can really be achieved only by abandoning ego attachment. We're not the physical body. We are the soul. We're made in the perfect image of God. So if you get on that track, it seems like it shouldn't be so hard to let go of all those attachments that we have to all of the stuff out here that is not ours. And we have to move toward that soul purity if we are to actually see God. We have this grand description from Master about universes being manifested and transmuted and dissolved, and the expansion of auras and just all of this fantastic stuff, blazing galaxies and so on. But even more remarkable, I think, is that whole experience came right from within him. It's not that he was viewing it out there somewhere, which may be the way we think of it when we read that and listen to it. Oh, yeah, he was seeing out there. No, that came from within him. We don't have to go off somewhere to experience that. Maybe it makes more sense to say he didn't have to go out there, because that's easier to imagine than ourselves doing it. But he didn't have to go off somewhere. He didn't have to go into a vault where it was all completely secluded from things around him, or on some promontory or something, looking out over the ocean, or go up into space, in a rocket ship, or however Master could get there and see all those things out there. No, but he said, I cognized the center of the Imperium, the heart of all that was manifested that he saw, as a point of intuitive perception where? In my heart. In my heart. So may we begin to see why the heart has to be pure to be able to have that experience. It can't really be gunked up or dusty or anything if we're expecting the full experience of God, which is centered in the heart. It's really the essence of all Scripture, of self-realization, of Sanatan Dharma. We can gain complete oneness with the ultimate consciousness, or we often call God, but with the ultimate consciousness, if we're able to make our hearts pure. And the center everywhere, circumference nowhere, the center right in our hearts. Okay, great. If it's within me, why can't I just experience it? Why isn't it just there? Well, the heart's an issue, and what do we do about that? Swami said that one way that we can begin making that journey there is to start seeing beings the same. This is interesting because he hasn't, many things Swamiji said is written all over the place, but this is, I don't remember hearing it any place else in this one place, that we look at beings, and we could just start with people, and we try to see the non-differences. We try to stop discriminating and distinguishing and making people all different, which what implies judgment, right? That we stop doing that and we begin to see them more and more similar, more and more the same. Now, he also says, don't be stupid. Don't be in a situation that you should be very wary of and concerned, and there may be a person who could take advantage of you and treat them just the same as you do your loving family or your guru buys. Don't be stupid about it, but we're talking about perception. We're talking about the way we view the world. He says this is a practice to begin with, because those things that make us see people as different are things that are stuck in the heart, that need to be released, that need to be let go of, that we need to go beyond. The Gita says that an enlightened person looks at a lump of gold and looks at a lump of clay and reacts the same way. Doesn't really treat them or react emotionally or let their little fantasies go any different on either of them. And as we know, they're all just patterns of energy anyway, but it's that attachment, what we attribute to that gold and what could it do for us versus that lump of clay and what it wouldn't do for us. Complete, calm acceptance. Sita was reading about contentment, and it ties right in here. Beginning to see things all as equal begins to still that swinging of the pendulum that takes us from like to dislike, from love to hate, from unhappiness to happiness, back and forth. And a part of that is to remember that we're all born perfectly into exactly what we need. We have in front of us, in our challenges as well as our delights, the things that God has put there for us to help us to grow, to help us accomplish this task, to help us move on closer to a point where we can see God. The heart is the chakra where these dislikes and likes are located. So if we can get the heart pure, there are no bounds. But it's not a light task. We have to become absorbed in it. Even if you have to put Post-its all over your dashboard and all over your desk at work or wherever to remind you. Oh, yes, God. Oh, yes, equanimity. Everything's equal. I'm contented, whatever you have to do, to remind yourself, okay, this is where I'm headed. This is where I'm going. And it's not an easy thing. If a person has a business or a practice of some sort that they've spent years developing, and then it has to close, and maybe their career or that way of looking at their career is over and they're going to have to start from scratch or whatever that means. Looking at it just the same way they would have if the business had continued and become even more successful. That's really demanding. But that's what we're being asked to do here. Do you remember the story about I think it's from the AY. The sadhu is walking down the beach, and a policeman has been sent out to capture a murderer, and he has the very same profile from behind as the sadhu that's walking along. And so he goes yelling down there, "Stop, stop!" And the guy wouldn't stop. So finally, turn around, show me your face to see you. And he wouldn't do that. So he's trying to get control of this man walking along the beach, and in the process, he had his sword out and he cut his arm off. And so the sadhu turns around, his arm laying at his feet, and said, "Sir, I believe that the murderer you are seeking is in such and such a district, just over there." And then he reaches down and gets his arm and continues walking down the beach and works with a little bit until eventually it's reunited with his. So that's in the AY, right? Isn't that the AY story? Yeah. Oh, that's right. It's what the policeman told him when he was in Brindaban, I think. Yeah. Well, there's equanimity. There's contentment. I don't want to look at that story and make it discouraging for me, because I know I'm pretty far from that. But there was someone who had done it, and it's a step along the way. We must be humble and realistic about where we really are in this process. We can't pretend. Well, we can, but it's not helpful to pretend that we're farther along the path. Certainly not to ourselves, and it doesn't help us with others either. We need to be very realistic about where we are and what the next steps are that should be taken. And certainly God is not fooled, nor our guru. So we need to be tuned in to our own reality. We need to be able to be amused by ourselves and our condition and where we are, as I think God is often amused. At least he's amused at the way we react to it. I don't know that he has a mouth that the ends turn up on a smile, but it's the same thing, whatever that divine consciousness is. I can just see it's like shaking his head and going, "Oh boy, Rammurti, he did it again," and or whatever the circumstance was. In fact, that may be one of our greatest challenges, to go down this path, to get rid of the impurities of our heart, is really seeing where we are. Because if we can see where we are right now, then we know what things to work on and to be amused with ourselves in the same way God is amused with us. So we should all go back into the lab, right? Meditation, postures, classes, energization, satsang. This is our laboratory to work out these impurities of the heart. And it's great because we can share it with fellow devotees that come together to do those things from time to time. May you see God.
I have a love who's far away, far away, far away. I have a love who's far away, farther away than the stars. And yet she's stolen my heart away, heart away. Had she stolen my heart away, farther away than the stars. Keep me not bound, no, teach me to fly far from earth's madness, free ere I die. Keep me not bound here, teach me to fly farther away than the stars. There's nothing here nearly so dear, nearly so dear, nearly so dear. There's nothing here nearly so dear as her laughter away in the stars.